In this video, I'll discuss the core technologies that power the web, namely HTML, CSS, and JavaScript. Together and working in tandem, these core technologies drive the modern web, and they provide a powerful tool set for online expression. Often, these technologies are described as the three layers of web design and development. They build on each other to create great user experiences. HTML is called the structural layer, CSS the presentational layer, and JavaScript the behavioral layer. HTML provides the content, CSS the design, and JavaScript enables rich and dynamic experiences. Together, the layers build upon themselves to deliver increasingly rich, usable, and meaningful content. Let's look at each technology in a little more detail. First, HTML, or hypertext markup language. Often with a file extension of .html or .htm, this is just a text document that describes both the structure and the content of our web page. HTML is comprised first of content. Great content is the backbone of any great web page. But content alone isn't enough. We need to describe what that content is about. And so HTML provides tags that provide meaning for our content. That's what markup really is. It's describing content. We're saying, what is this content piece? And in this case, an H1 tag is a top-level header, suggesting that my content is a title or heading or important piece of information describing what else follows, whatever follows that. So this particular tag, or HTML tags in general, are comprised first of an opening, which we know begins. We're saying, hey, the title is beginning here, right? And a closing marked by the slash, and we'll have our closing tag. Altogether, this is considered an HTML element. So now that we have some content and we marked up that content to identify its type, what type of content is this? We've given meaning to the content by saying that it's a top-level header. Well, on our page, it's still not visually interesting until we add our next layer, or CSS. Cascading style sheets provide the visual presentation, layout, and formatting for our web page. Often they're contained in an external file named .css, but can also be embedded within the page in style tags or inline in HTML tags. So CSS, like this declaration here, which would functionally set the size of our type, the font size, to 64 pixels for our H1 header, is comprised of a selector, which determines which element or elements we'll be applying our properties to, then a property, followed by that property's value. The syntax here is the same for any CSS, although we could add multiple properties within our declaration brackets. The declaration brackets begin with an opening curly brace and end with a closing curly brace, and we can have multiple declarations within those, every declaration including a property name followed by a colon and then a value for that property, often with a unit of measure such as pixels or ems or percentages, and ending with a semicolon. Altogether, this is called a CSS rule. While HTML brings our content and gives meaning to that content, CSS brings that content to life visually. That's what gives us our visual presentation and our formatting and our layout. So now we have a well-designed web page, but probably that web page is relatively static unless we add our next layer, JavaScript. JavaScript adds behavior, logic, visual effects, and interactivity to our web page. JavaScript's often also contained in an external file with the extension of .js, but can also be embedded within HTML inside of a script tag. Let's take a look at a script. Here's an example of some JavaScript. JavaScript will take our web page from something that's static to something that's dynamic or changeable. JavaScript is a robust programming language that's really powerful for giving web pages the ability to do things, right? It adds behavior and interactivity and special effects. It transforms our web pages into web applications that users can use instead of just read or view. So in this sample script, we're defining a variable called username and then calling a prompt function that would prompt the user to enter their name into a dialog box. That name is stored into the username variable and then written dynamically back to the document using the document write function in JavaScript, which would add the username along with the text hello inside of a top-level heading tag. HTML, CSS, and JavaScript work together to define, design, and bring web pages to life. And while they can be written inline and in the same document, when creating a web page, it's desirable to keep these layers separated and in different documents. Structure should be confined to the HTML, visual styles to the CSS, and behaviors to any JavaScripts that the site might use. Such separation makes sites easier to update, allows resources to be shared, which in turn enable faster downloads, and generally improves SEO accessibility and backwards compatibility. So if we think of these layers or a web page in general as a person, the HTML is the bones and the skeleton, and the CSS is the skin and the clothes, and the JavaScript is the brain and the behavior. And together, they make the web come alive.